I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mark Schumacher, the CEO of the Home Furnishings Association, and this is one of our webinars. And if the backdrop looks weird, I'm actually on location. I'm in Valdosta, Georgia, as I join you for this webinar as we honor one of our Retailers of the Year winners. I'm certainly happy to be taking the time out from what I'm doing here for this subject, because today we are going to be talking about cybersecurity and how all of you, and I want to underline all of you, small, medium, large, doesn't matter the size of your business, you're going to have takeaways today that are going to be important for you moving forward to make sure that your business is safe. Before I get there, I want to just mention a couple of things as always. On the right side of your screen, you're going to see a small chat box. If you have any questions, feel free, enter them in there. I'll be monitoring that here. You might see me glancing down. I'll be monitoring to see if we have questions coming in. That's number one. Number two, please go to myhfa.org/webinar. Every webinar that we conduct, this will be added to it, goes into the library there of webinars that you can click on and listen to. And it is really full of every subject matter you could ever possibly need to help you run your business successfully. So please make sure that you go there. But without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. He's Rick Snyder. Now, Rick is, and he's the one that said this, so I'm not being flippant here. He's had not 2 careers, he's had 5 careers. And one of those actually in the middle 2000s, from 2011 to 2018, is he was the governor of the state of Michigan. But prior to that, and during that process, he has had a lot of experience in the cyber world. For those of you that can harken back to the 1990s, he also was the number 2 at Gateway Computers, and that's probably a name familiar to a lot of you. So this has been something he's been really expert at and passionate about, and so that's why in 2021 he co-founded a company called Senscy, which is focusing on cyber threats to businesses and how to protect them. So without further ado, Rick, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it very, very much. Did I overstate or understate that, or you got to let me off the hook here? So you have had 5 careers, right?
I have, but like I said, about every decade I go on to something new. I'm just trying to prove too that as we all age, that you can be 60 something and do a startup. I may have another career in me still. I mean, we got a lot of years to go. We're still climbing.
I mean, reinvention, there's nothing wrong with that. I appreciate that. And by the way, just I'm going to be doing a lot of note taking here. So if I'm looking down here, I'm going to be really kind of trying to get a good handle on all the stuff we talk about. But let me just get right out of the gates here, and I'd like to go for the headlines first. So let's just if I could ask you to kind of characterize where you feel we are with cyber threats when it comes to, let's just talk specifically about our sector, home furnishing retail, that style of retail. How big of a threat is this right now for anybody doing business in our retail furnishings world?
Well, it's a real threat. And there have been instances that have been documented of home furnishing companies being attacked. Again, without mentioning names, there's a fairly large company in Ohio that had a major attack in terms of their resources. One down in Florida, where the customer data was put at risk. You had a manufacturer that was shut down for a couple of weeks even in this industry. So this is something that's real. The challenge with cyber threats like this is it's too easy for them to attack as many people as possible. If you look at many of these attackers, they're largely foreign-based, and it doesn't take more work to attack 100 companies, 1,000 companies than just one company. It's just having more addresses to blast more attacks out at. So that's one of the great challenges of cybersecurity versus what would be considered traditional criminal stuff. I mean, a bank robber can only hit one bank at a time. Where if you're a cyber criminal, you can literally launch attacks on many parties, and it could be all across an industry.
Rick, I want to kind of, this is one of those subject matters that I think we need to break it down into some bite-sized pieces here. So let's first of all talk about, and I don't even know if it's worthwhile to sort of rank it or not, but we talk about what's being targeted here. What are the biggest targets? Is it the customer data that many of these businesses have? Is it employee data? Is it financial data? Well, I know that there's probably part of the answer is yes to all of them, but give us an idea about how they are hierarchically kind of ranked, that we're the biggest threats as far as these hackers targeting.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark, and it's evolved over time. If you go back 5, 10 years, it was a different group of people looking for different things, different kind of goals. Now it's become much more financially based, where these bad guys are actually trying to make money or gather intellectual capital or property in some fashion. So 2 categories I'd give you. One is the whole category of ransomware. Because again, if you go back 5, 10 years, you never heard of ransomware really. This is basically where they're taking over your system and holding it hostage in exchange for payments. And this is one of the downsides to cryptocurrency, because now there's a ready means that they can get paid where they think they can get away with it, although there is some tracking possible of cryptocurrency. So ransomware is one huge category. The other one is the one you mentioned, that all of the above, but it's really about data and acquiring data and then usually reselling that data. Again, it gets back to financial things. In the old days, it used to be about nation states potentially conflicting with one another, or hackers that didn't like somebody that had a social cause. Much of this now is all about money, either ransomware or selling data. And the data that's most valuable in many cases, again, this is where retailers are more vulnerable in your industry, is credit card data or other financial information on your clients. Because those are all things that can be monetized in some fashion easier than many other things. I mean, one sector you often see getting hit now are healthcare places, medical centers, and they're after medical data even. But if you think about it, how much easier is it to monetize somebody's credit card number than knowing somebody had a broken arm?
Right. And it's interesting, Rick, because our industry, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, it really emphasized even more the need for brick and mortar retailers to have a presence online, to be able to be transactional on their websites. So there's this huge wave of we've got to be more technologically balanced, and especially when you talk about communicating through omnichannel, and it's got to be all of these things together. So I mean, with a greater dependency for the success of your business on web and everything else, if somebody somehow through ransomware takes over your website, I mean, the leverage there for the ransom is they're essentially shutting your business down. I mean, is that a fair way to put it? Let's talk 2 ways. First of all, shutting you down as far as the website is concerned, and then second of all, shutting you down when it comes to your internal systems as well. Could you talk a little bit about that, because that's really insidious and can absolutely grind your business to a complete standstill.
Yeah, it's a huge cost and a disruption of business. And you said it can be a website or it could be the business. And one thing I would emphasize, and you mentioned it about many people, many of your retailers that were brick and mortar going online, is even if the people that haven't gone online, you're still as vulnerable, because if you have email internally to your system, the website is just another venue. As you said, it could be a website kind of attack taking over, or it could be the operational piece. The operational piece is an even bigger problem quite often. And I'll go back to that illustration. I mentioned that there was a furniture manufacturer I think it would have been in the September, October timeframe. They were shut down for 2 weeks because of a ransomware attack. I mean, literally shut down their production. That's staggering to think about the capabilities. And then you think this was one of the largest furniture manufacturers in the world. Just think of the resources they had to respond and deal with it versus being, a nice size, but compared to them, a relatively small player that didn't have, cybersecurity professionals on staff and a big IT staff. And if you don't have those resources, you need to be even more thoughtful about forward planning and understanding what could happen and preparing and be more.
I mean, so this is a great point. And I think something that's very germane for this audience is that, so let's really just kind of spell this out. Does the size of my company matter? when it comes to my vulnerability. They don't just go after the big guys, I'm assuming. It can be economies of scale, right? If they can get money out of business of all sizes. So should I be not feeling like I can rest easy because I'm a single store operator and they're not going to go after, I'm small potatoes compared to these other guys? Or how would you sort of put this whole business size within this threat theater we're talking about?
Yeah, you have to worry about it regardless of your size and regardless of your geography. Geography is irrelevant too, where you're located. The thing about the cyber world is, as I mentioned early on, it's easy to attack 1,000 parties as it is one, just about. It's just adding more parties to the attack. And they actually know that these smaller organizations are less prepared. They don't have the resources to have these sophisticated tools that may keep things out. And they clearly quite often don't have the plans, the recovery plans. And I'd be happy to talk about the need for an incident response plan. Because that's one of the key things when we talk to small and medium-sized organizations, we talk to them about, we're going to help make you safer with the work we do in our organization, but you shouldn't assume you're not going to get hit, and you need to be prepared if something does happen rather than waiting for, you don't start figuring out how you deal with a fire after the fire is already burning your place down.
Yep, it's about fire prevention, not firefighting.
Yeah.
We will get to the response steps, but I think this is a good point to dig into something that you and I talked about prior to the webinar today. And that is that, because we just scared the heck out of the small, medium-sized business owners that are listening to this. I understand that the most effective way to lower your risk is to have a well-educated workforce. Because while I think that a lot of us have this view of a cyber threat as some dark room where there's a guy on a computer and he's this brilliant hacker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My understanding is that some of the most common threats come from phishing on emails and the fact that all it takes is one well-intentioned click of something that comes in that can absolutely cripple your business. So let's talk about that first and foremost, the importance of making sure, no matter the size of your business, that your staff is educated as to what to look for and what to avoid.
Absolutely. So over 80% of attacks that are successful are due to human error. So this is the whole thing. This isn't about having sophisticated tools. The best thing you can do is, as you said, do basic human things to improve practices. So one thing that is one of the key pillars is doing cybersecurity awareness training, which there's a lot of providers. We do it, a lot of there are bigger companies that do it. And the idea is, you may have gone through this, is quite often you'll have a lesson every couple months, and usually it involves a video, and at the end there's a simple quiz, and they'll be on subjects that are important, like how do you do a strong password, how do you do remote work, how do you do two-factor authentication, what are steps you need to take. And one of the things that's really interesting when I talk to clients or people out there in the world, they'll go, well, I'm worried my employees aren't going to want to do more. I'm already asking for a lot. So they're going to, kind of rebel at the thought of having to watch these videos. And I said, that's not right. I said, the issue is you're not presenting it the right way to the people that work for you. I said, you should be promoting this as a free employee benefit. This isn't a burden you're asking them to do. If they do awareness training the right way, they're going to learn lessons that they should be taking home and sharing with their spouse and their kids and everyone else. It's actually a good thing to have awareness training at the front lines, because it's a win not only for the company and the employee, it's a win for everyone if you're more aware. One of the key things to really be successful, we like to describe it as, you need to move from a passive to an active culture with respect to cybersecurity. And you need to recognize cybersecurity is never going to be the most important thing in your life unless you actually have this huge challenge right in front of you. But you need to have it in the background, and you need to be actively thinking about it while you do things. And you mentioned it, Mark, yourself about that phishing email. So it's like when you get an email that looks questionable, usually you're working so hard, it's like, God, I want to get back to this person, so I'm going to click this, or they've asked me to do something or give them information, so I've got to immediately do it. You need to get a culture where you sort of build in that buffer, that pause, to sort of say, well, I got this email, and if I add maybe 15 seconds, 30 seconds at the top end a minute to look at it a little closer to say, does this make sense? Does this sound right? Is something out of place? Or can I check that address on this thing? Or something's not spelled right? Or it doesn't, they're asking for money or something they shouldn't normally ask for. That's when you can really have this culture come across. That's the human element making you much safer.
And I gotta tell you, I think that the sophistication level is unbelievable. And we have one of the things that we do internally that I really appreciate, because we've got some vigilant folks, is that when something comes through that is phishing, often it's shared with everybody to say, here's an example what to look for, because it's so doggone good. A lot of it comes from my signature. Because as the CEO, you get something, so people are going to pay attention to it. So we've had phishing where they've sent out emails that look just like my emails, and it's scary. And so to your point, I love the pause factor, which I think is important anytime you respond to any email personally, because sometimes we fire things off too quick. But I think it's one of those things where if you ever want to just take a moment to digest it for a second. It sounds to me, and I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, it sounds like that could be the difference between a hacker getting in and a hacker not. Am I over dramatizing it there, or is that true?
No, and these happen all the time. You're bombarded with them in your personal and professional life. So this is where it's best practice, again, cultural change in how you behave to look out for these things. A great illustration, we did this even in our own organization. So we sent out a phishing exercise on ourselves that said, we have a new paid time off policy. We have a new PTO policy. Check it out. And if you think about, well, hey, maybe I'm getting more vacation, or maybe there's something I need to know about, or wow, that could be kind of cool. I better click on that one. I want to click right away. And there are
how did they do? Did you have some people that almost went for it?
Yeah. That's where you
nature, right?
Continuous improvement. So it's like there were 2 or 3 things. When we do these exercises, we usually make sure there's like 2 or 3 things they could have caught. And because when we do it too, we want to give people feedback in a constructive way. It's not about getting someone in trouble. It's not about criticizing someone. It's educational and supportive, because every single one of us could find some topic that we might click on, because again, it's just that lapse of timing, that you're in a rush.
And it's interesting, a couple of things that I want to just kind of highlight there. You talked about the subject matter. That's just like, this is what they're doing. They're baiting you, right? They really want you to bite hard on it. And I think that this is why, and I've heard this suggested, and we haven't said it specifically, but I have a feeling you're going to chime in on this too, is that to get us away from that, oh, I'm overburdening my employees. This is really part of an overall training on communication acumen, right? What you're talking about, Rick, with pausing and really reading something, is something we should be doing on every email, not just for security, but just to make sure that we're not reading something incorrectly and sending something going, oh gosh, I shouldn't have sent that. How many times has that happened? So it seems to me like this could be a piece of really solid training when it comes to how to handle email communications, text messaging, period, right? Shouldn't this be a part of that, so that it doesn't seem like this outlier that's so egregious that I've got to do something else?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that 100%, because the analogy I would give you, or the corollary of that, is before we worried about all these phishing things, when email first got started, and I love my gateway days, but we were early email people, was the famous thing about you had to train people not to do flame mail, which is basically you get some email and you're all wound up and you have this visceral reaction and you write some things in an email that you'd never say to this person. And you should have never written it in an email.
Right. So,
So
so
hopefully a
can, I
lot
mean,
of us learned that lesson, either the easy way or the hard way. But it's the same thing that you had to have that pause though after you got the
right.
email and think about your response rather than just getting on and typing. The social media is one of the worst things in the world. It's one of the best things in the world, and one of the worst things in the world because people don't have a filter now.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I heard this from a member retailer, also in talking about this issue of training the staff, where they made the point to the staff about remember, if we have a major attack that either shuts us down or costs us a lot of money, it's a threat to all of us. Everybody's job, that sort of thing. So there's that part of it too. I think that because you had mentioned a little bit about that, but that's something that I know that some business owners are making the point of saying this is about everybody's livelihood, not just the store.
Yeah, and I would emphasize with even within the context of all your employees, there are certain groups that need extra training and attention, particularly the finance people and some of the IT and management people, because they're prime targets. The classic ones you'll find are someone sending something to say, I've changed from an employee to the finance or HR people saying, I've changed my banking information, so please change my direct deposit to this account. And it's a scam. But all of a sudden they change that. The person's not getting their paycheck. It's going to the bad guys. That's a terrible thing to have happen. Or the wire transfer, or the version that's happening now quite often is with the supply chain challenges we had, is to say we weren't able to get this table set in this quantity, and we've got a new supplier. They said they can get what we need right away because we have demand for it, but you need to wire some money immediately so we have a deposit down. And it's made up.
Right. Okay. I mean, you're giving us a lot of food for thought here as to things we need to be looking for. So a couple of things that you mentioned, I want to get your take on. And again, so these are great takeaways for everybody watching this. So is there a rule of thumb for how often I should be having my team change passwords?
You should be doing that anywhere from 60 to 90 days are good benchmarks. You can do it more often, but 60 to 90 days. A couple things though I would add more, just along with the frequency though. Strong passwords or a password manager are critically important. And strong passwords are those things that sometimes drive you nuts, the alphanumeric, different versions, but think about how you might structure that, and do you have your own system made up? The other one that we quite often run across though is don't reuse passwords in your life. And I know that's more work. That's where a password manager can be really helpful if you have a lot to keep track of. And there are some good ones of those. But if you reuse a password and the one place gets hacked, that they get your password from there, and this could happen in your private life. If you're using the same passwords in your personal and private, work life, if somehow they get your information, your passwords, then they'll try that password on all your accounts, including your work, and then they're in.
Yep. Yeah, I'm becoming more of a password changer than I think I ever have been. A question just came in, by the way, as we're talking about this. Is there a password manager type of program that you recommend?
Well, I don't necessarily want to be a commercial for all these other people, but there are 2 or 3 good ones out there. I mean, yeah, you can find that. And what I'd recommend, and if people want to go offline, we're happy to, we try to do good, better, best with people, because there are different price points and different things that you can use these password managers. But for all these services, there's an established market out there that you can find good people at a reasonable price to do that kind of work for password managers.
Perfect. I appreciate that. And then somebody else asked also, is changing passwords frequently, is that in and of itself an issue? Is it if it's too frequent? And I don't know if there's a concern about people, like you said, either reconstituting. But is there anything? Because when you said 60 to 90 days is right, a lot of people are wondering, well, is doing it more often than that not a good idea?
Well, that's where you can get into this churn thing. It just makes your life too complicated in terms of that. I mean, we had a classic one at the state of Michigan, because we had some large systems where people were on multiple systems, and we went to password managers because we went out and got employee suggestions at one point we had 47,000 employees. So we had 2 rise to the top, and one of them was a password manager because the person said, Yeah, I've got so many passwords, I write them all on a sticky and stick them on my monitor.
Okay. Not a good idea.
This is not a good thing. So it's like, and yet, if you got that many people and they're saying they're doing it, there's probably a bunch more.
And I mean, I'm one of those people that I have it in a secure protected file, some of the reminders, things of that sort. Is that okay, or do I have a false sense of security from that?
No, if you have it with its own password protection and encryption and stuff like that, you just want to make sure it's secure. Again,
Gotcha.
that's the easy person's version of a password manager if it's done right.
Okay. And we also talked about, you mentioned briefly about two-factor authentication. I know that's particularly popular. We have it for, the banking that the association does and things of that sort. I have it in personal banking as well. Can you talk a little bit about implementing that, how that can be not only, I mean, obviously it's helpful, but how that fits in? How would you utilize two-factor authentication for the folks listening to this to have it be the most effective?
Yeah, two-factor authentication, for people that don't know, is there's different ways to do it, but the most common way quite often is where after you enter your password, it says, we're gonna send you a text or an email, usually a text to your phone. So it's a separate device where it'll have a code that you enter that then allows you access. That's a great thing to do. And for your financial accounts, as you said, Mark, you should have it clearly on all your bank accounts, your credit card information, but we recommend you do it on your social media accounts, almost any account, any kind of file or important thing that has important data, turn on two-factor authentication. It's not that big a deal to get that text to add that code, and you're dramatically safer. Because if you think about it from the bad guy's perspective, they don't want to work too hard. Again, they're doing these massive things. So if they find somebody that is simple, and I'll go back to the easy illustration that you started with about passwords. There are people that have their password as admin still, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Those people are in trouble because it's too easy to do. So if you do good, strong passwords, you do it right, and then you add multi-factor, you've created a strong barrier to entry.
So, an interesting, there's a lot of ways we can go with this, but I hope this question makes sense, and I'm not going to credit it to any of the people that are taking part. This is something I'm curious about. So if you have, obviously, if you're hit with ransomware, different story. You're going to know you got an issue. Is it a concern that sometimes you don't know you've been attacked? And what I mean by that is that somebody lingers enough in the system to really, deepen the issue or have a problem. I mean, how do you really know in some instances that you've been attacked? If it's not the obvious ransomware and you're being held hostage, your website's being held hostage, et cetera. How do you know?
Yeah, there are some tools to look for that, but that's something, if something isn't running right, if it doesn't make sense. I mean, I had this going back years ago. We actually had somebody, they were using a home computer in my house because that was the computer the kids had, because I had a separate computer for them. So I knew if it got messed up, I could limit the damage. But actually we had foreign actors actually running software in the background on our computer. And they weren't trying to steal our stuff. They were just using our computer for its computer power back in those days. They don't need to do that often anymore, because computers, they can get that computer power. But you need to always think about what could be going on. But most things, if you have an issue, you're going to know about it fairly quickly, because again, the bad guys are going to be trying to monetize things, which is different than some of the old purposes they had. They're going to try to get money out of you as quickly as they can.
And clarify one thing, something you just said that made me think about it. So a lot of our members, are smaller to mid-sized businesses. And so a lot of times, home and work are sometimes married together to a certain degree. There's a lot of bleed over there. So are you also suggesting that there be, and I'm going to use this word probably incorrectly, but almost like partitioning your work systems from your home systems? And I'm almost feeling like you're going to say, don't have those things too connected or communicating too closely, because it just gives the bad guy another access point through your home system. Should there be a way of kind of kind of demarcating those two systems if you have
Yeah,
both?
to be safer, it's better to have them segregated, to separate them in some fashion. And that's not always possible, depending on how big you are or what's, you have access resources in your organization. But that's a good thing to do. One, though, I would emphasize to you, we haven't really talked about, but I think it's important that everyone recognize because of remote work and where you're at, for example. If you're doing things remotely and you're not on a trusted network, if you're not at a place on a regular basis or you set up or they have good security, you want to be using a virtual private network. Something called a VPN is the language, but it stands for virtual private network. And it basically creates an encrypted tunnel from where you're at to where you're communicating. So bad guys can't come get in your system while you're on that kind of remote network situation. And I'll give you an illustration that just amazed me. I was giving a speech to a conference in person, and they were doing this in a casino. We have casinos in Michigan. So it was in a casino, and I'm doing a talk on cybersecurity, and these were financial professionals. So I asked the question, how many people are on the network here to stay in touch with the office? They all raised their hand. I said, how many are on a virtual private network to be on this? And it staggered me. It was like less than 10% of the people that were on the casino's public network were on a virtual private network. And it's like, these were financially, it was terrifying to me because the only place worse than a casino I could think of, because that's where they should be trolling to get your stuff, is airports. Airport terminals. To be on a public network, not on a VPN, is not a good decision.
So how does somebody utilize or activate a VPN? Let's not assume everybody knows.
Yeah, again, there are suppliers you can get this. It's separate software you put on your system. It's relatively inexpensive. You're talking a few dollars a month to have this system. And whenever you're remote, you basically have it active to create a kind of an umbrella of protection around you, a bubble around you. So people that are otherwise on that public network can't try to see your traffic, learn about your system and such. So it's highly recommended.
So if my business gets attacked, what are the steps I need to take right away? Can you give us an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, the number one thing is to have that plan. And again, this is an illustration that we learned from our business going out. We do free analysis for companies. We call them Senscy scores. There's a FICO score for your credit. We do a Senscy score for your organization, and a 1,000-point scale. And one of the questions we go through about how you're protecting yourself, but one of the questions we ask is, do you have an incident response plan? So I'd ask everyone on this webinar, when they get off, to go ask their IT folks, do we have an incident response plan? And what we found is less than 20% of the people of organizations have an incident response plan. So it's a really scary thing, Mark. This is back to that analogy of a fire and planning for it, knowing what to do. Because your incident response plan should have multiple things. It should have, if we get hit, what employees need to be contacted and what order. What clients or customers need to be contacted? What do we need to tell them? Where are our backups? If we have insurance, what are our policies? And we need to make those calls, the very first calls. If you want to get your coverage effective, first call you need to make is to your insurance company to go get that covered. So it's really the outline of all these steps, because you don't want to wait until the crisis has happened to start responding to it. And that's where you'll have this kind of inventory of things that you should be doing. And you're an old communications person, you know that. Just think about how important it is what do you tell your employees and your customers if you have something bad going on, because you don't want to lose control of that narrative.
So, okay, so I mean, I like this a lot. So if so you've got that plan, so you activate that plan. So right out of the gates, you said, your first thing would be you got to let people know. Obviously, you got to inform the team what's going to go on. You should have an idea, like you said, after this webinar, you need to have an idea about where your backup is. That's super key. And we'll talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then I know we have cyber insurance, excuse me, and that's something that people may want to look at what those options look like and what is covered and what is not. So let's talk backups real quick. So good to have, but what about the access to that and the connection to the system? How can you make sure that the backup is not going to be poisoned along with whatever attack happens?
Yeah, that's where you want to segregate that. So again, you want to have it can be in the cloud, it can be in a server. The tendency now is to have it up in the cloud somewhere, separate from your other information. The one thing I encourage people to look at, we encourage people to look at, is it's one thing to back up, but have you ever tried to restore your backup?
Right.
It's that thing. It's like, going back to the fire thing, it's like, okay, you bought fire extinguishers for your house, but do you know where they are anymore? Do you know where you keep them? You got them in the house. And secondly, have you looked to see, are they still charged so they still work right versus being out of date? Same thing with your backups. It's good to do a restoration every so often to know that it's there. Because if you think about it, this goes back to the whole cyber universe. Is when we work with people, we tell them we can help them be safer. It's safe. I mean, if someone tells someone can be me, they can come in and work with you so you're safe, I tell them they're lying. And I don't say that lightly. The NSA, the National Security Agency, is not safe. They can get hacked by somebody. So it's important to do all these protective measures. You're going to increase your likelihood of not having a problem if you're doing passwords, the things multi-factor, all the things we've talked about. But don't assume something's not going to happen. So do this incident response plan, do those backups. That's another layer. And then insurance is a third layer. So build these layers of protection as part of your culture, and then you're going to be much better off and you're going to sleep a lot better.
So this is interesting. We got a question that actually in some ways is like a case study here. So I want to get your reaction to this. This is really quite good. This attendee says, my business was hacked last year and I had two-step notifications on most accounts, but then the hackers ported my cell phone number away from me. So I wasn't even getting the two-step notifications. What do you suggest in that sense?
Yeah, that can happen. It doesn't happen real often, but that's one of the limitations of using the text message as two-factor. So another way you can do authentication, if you've seen that or worried about it, I still think it's fairly infrequent, but it could become more frequent over time because people are learning how to essentially get people's text. There's things called authenticators. And it's a piece of software you have on your system that is synced, kind of like a virtual clock kind of, that's generating codes all the time. And it's generating them on your system and it's generating them somewhere out in the cloud for that software thing. And you need to be able on your system only to bring up that code to put it in to make sure it works. So there are 2 or 3 measures, but do one or the other. I still think for most people, the text is probably a good way. Someone spent a lot of time really going after this person to do that work, but it can happen. Again, this is where if people ask me if you're safe, the answer is no. Are you safer? Is the answer can be yes.
And this person mentioned that that the hackers took over what's referred to here as all the monetized platforms, websites, Square, accounting site, et cetera. So that's a really serious attack. Gosh, I mean that's actually kind of scary in certain ways. And I know from personal experience that we have, one of our bank accounts for the association is the two-step authentication is actually a generated email from the bank, and another one is an app that creates tokens, and those are consistently every I think 30 seconds it changes. So there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah, tokens the authenticator, same kind of model. Yep. But the one thing I would tell you with wires or if it's a significant dollar amount, do a verbal confirmation is clearly the best thing to do. If you're talking a significant amount of money, they still work, these things. So pick it up and dial in and talk to the human on the other side, because the wires are wire transfers and money transfers of significance are the #1 target. Because if you think about it, that's the easiest way to get a bunch of money from somebody. And I've seen it happen to very sophisticated people.
And we have, and I wasn't planning to make us kind of the case study, but like every business, we face this kind of stuff. We utilize through our primary bank a process called positive pay. Are you familiar with it? They may be using a different, they may use a different terminology for what you're talking about, but essentially what that means is that we have the first half of every day to look at what's going to go through that day as far as ACHs and also checks. And we have the ability to clear them as exceptions. And we're disciplined now to where there is one of us designated every day that reviews that and looks at each one and then lets the others know that it's been reviewed and exceptions have been taken care of. Is that, I mean, maybe the people we're dealing with call it positive pay, but is that something that you would also suggest? I'm assuming a lot of banks have something like that where you can just, I mean, you don't have to get on the phone, it's right there. You can just log in for 2 minutes every morning and do it.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good steps. Those are good practices. The only thing I would recommend that also go with that is for the designated person is make sure it's clear who do they go to if they see something of concern, and to make sure they never get criticized for bringing up a concern. So this is where you got to get that culture not to discourage someone.
Right. No, this came to us because we had some entities that had just enough information to start trying to ping us for ACHs, and this was recommended. And to your point, there's only two of us. One does the exception, lets the other one know, and the other one is it's also not having 10 people do it. It's like we make sure that we're dedicated, so there's no other sort of noise in the system. Is that something that's also important, is to not have an over amount of access to a lot of these systems by people on your teams? Should it be a limited number of people, that more is not necessarily better?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only with respect, we've been mainly talking about financial transactions, but with your system access. So if you look at your IT systems and your network, there's a group called administrative rights. So who has administrative rights to go change permissions, to do things like that? You want to have as few permissions as possible to as many people as possible. So the people out, the regular user, you don't want them to have permissions to go do changes, to add people, to do anything like that. You want a very tight group of people that keep control over access to the overall network or to those major software systems. And one thing that quite often happens, this gets back to the people side of things again, is you need to keep that up to date. The classic part is on admin rights or a bunch of these other things, is you hire new people and you'll decide, okay, I really do need to give rights to this person. The traditional flaw, though, is when someone leaves the organization, they forget to go revoke their rights.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a bunch of people that are no longer with the organization, and these aren't bad people, but if they get hacked and somebody gets access to their information, so I would assume they're going to be bad people. There's a lot of reasons they may have left, but you need to go make sure you revoke them when they depart, and that's an easy administrative thing to overlook.
And that's really housekeeping, and I think that we're trying to memorialize that too, and that may be something to suggest to people is that should become a piece of your offboarding process, right? When somebody leaves, that should be something. You talk about your plan. This is not a direct hacking threat, but yet it's a threat, and so it's like making sure that you're keeping that really clean. I think that's a wonderful point.
One thing to tie into that, I would mention to you, Mark, sorry, but
no.
is to have good cybersecurity policies in your organization. And there are policies, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. See, I don't like to use acronyms because I'm talking to regular people. But it's part of the federal government, and they have 5 best practice areas that talk about protection, responding, all these kind of key topics that are important. you should have policies in your organization, and people that are more active, like these people with administrative rights, IT people, should be trained in all these policies. One thing I would tell you, if you have a larger retailer, the policies probably work good right out of NIST. We actually have rewritten the policies in English so you can understand them.
And do me a favor, because I know this is going to be a question that's going to come across. Give us that acronym and give us the name of that again, because that's important.
Yeah, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's an agency of the federal government, and you want to find their cybersecurity policies. There are 5 pillars to good practice, best practice in cybersecurity that people should be aware of. Your IT people should all know these. But again, on a limited basis, you should get them out to everyone.
I'm assuming they have a website, so we'll just,
Yeah.
they can, this is something that I think we'll probably put out as a follow-up, letting people know. Absolutely. Somebody asked a question about, and this is a pretty good investment, actually, when you think about it. I mean, pretty good by expensive. Do companies need to have multiple servers?
Well, it depends on the company. What you're finding, the orientation is to go more and more on the cloud, which is likely a better solution for people longer term, given the cloud is so efficient. Multiple servers, one of the key issues you have with any kind of hardware, whether it's a desktop, notebook, or a server, is you have to make sure you're doing your updates, and particularly your security patches on a timely basis. So one thing that quite often happens, one recommendation I can clearly give you, is make sure everyone in your organization has automatic updates turned on anything they can. So if there's an update coming out, because quite often what you'll find are there are patches, there'll be regular upgrades to new versions of software, but there are security patches coming out on a more frequent basis quite often now. An illustration is we had a client that a law firm came to us that was using Google Chrome. And we let them know that there was it's called a 0-day exploit, where they figured out there's a hole in Google Chrome, Google has. And they sent out an alert saying, here's a patch that you need to do now. If you have automatic updates on, it should automatically update. Now, I wouldn't even assume that, and we don't. So we actually remind people to go double check that the automatic update happened, because it may not happen because you weren't plugged in the right time or something, but make sure you have that setting on and you're doing your patches and updates on a regular basis. It's not something to mess around with. It's not something to say, I got something more important, I can wait if it's a security patch.
If you do it as an automatic update, is that more of a protection? Because my first thought was when you said that is, oh great, I know that there are those phishing attempts that are just like, hey, you need to update this because of security issues. How is the auto update, does it help protect you from some of the nefarious update requests that are out there?
Yeah, auto update, that's, like I said, that's standard best practice. You should have that on.
Okay.
The only caveat I'd give you that I mentioned is don't assume it automatically updated every time. So it's good to check to see, did it actually happen? And the reason I say that, and I will mention one thing, I happen to have an iPhone. And if you have an iPhone, or I'm sure it's true with Android, a lot of these devices, it'll say they're going to update that night or something like that. But if you don't have it plugged into power and you don't have it a certain way, the auto update doesn't happen. Or if your battery is too low. So there's all these kind of permutations. So if it's a normal update, it's good if auto update probably would work. If it's a security update, that's an alert kind of thing, you should confirm that the auto update happened.
Yeah, good. No,
I'm trying to keep you safer.
No, but I mean, you just can't assume. I mean, that's the whole point of this. Vigilance is maybe the biggest protection that you can undertake. There's been a number of questions that have revolved around, are there specific types of threats specific to our industry? I think there's a hunger here to try to find out over and above a lot of these the ways that hackers can weasel their way into your business. And we know those, but are there things that you think are even more specific or more of a concern for the furniture industry?
Well, again, we talked about it. One, the supply chain side. So I would worry about that because, again, if you looked at the last few years, there's a lot of ups and downs getting product, and it's a good way for a bad guy to intervene, is to try to get you to believe, get someone in your organization to believe that there's some supply chain issue where money needs to be transmitted or you need to do something different. That's a good opportunity to intercept. All the credit card information. This is where the damage that can be done to a retailer is greater than it could to many other organizations because your reputation's on the line with your customers. And again, if they get customer information, you don't want to be, and I'm sure you've heard this, you don't want to be that party sending out that letter to every one of your customers saying, you know, some bad guys may have gotten your stuff and we're going to have to give you free, you know, credit reporting information for a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether you had other things to do this, recover quickly and everything else. What's the cost of having your customers then question whether they can trust doing business with you?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Can we talk about, you know, people are always kind of curious, you know, what are some of the, and I'd love you to give some examples if you have them, you know, what are the types of, you know, monetary threats here? I mean, you know, I know that I've heard of, you know, some larger retailers that the ransoms in the tens of thousands of dollars, a little bit higher. But you know, what have you seen as far as this goes? A lot of people are just really kind of curious what the monetary aspect of this could be.
Yeah, that would be fairly typical because the bad guy's goal is to shake you down. And if they get you once, they're going to come. Don't assume they're not going to come back again. And part of it is they're smart enough to know from a law enforcement point of view. First of all, they probably are in another country and they may not get caught at all. But in terms of drawing attention or getting a lot of people to pay attention to them, is it better to get $10,000 from 100 parties or to get $1 million from one party in terms of drawing the attention of law enforcement? If you do the 100 parties of $10,000, it's like a lot of people are not going to report it. They're not going to be pushing the same way. Law enforcement's not going to get all excited about a $10,000 thing when they got bigger fish to fry. If it's $1 million deal, I mean, you may get a lot more attention from the FBI and all the law enforcement to go after the guys. So the bad guys are actually, I hate to say this, they're bad people, but a lot of them are smart people. And so they're smart enough to sort of figure out what's that threshold of not making their risk profile go up even higher. Because again, they can do volumes at that lower risk profile.
So something you said sparked my interest. Are you more of a target if you've been hacked once?
Yeah.
Will they try to get back at you rather quickly before you have a chance to really fix things? I mean, how common is that? That's a concern.
Well, that's where you need to be proactive about improving your practices, changing your culture, doing all those things, because I mean, it's common sense that you're going to be a bigger target next time. It's the old thing. It's like, is it easier to get something out of an existing customer or a new customer? And I'm using customer in a bad sense here, but to prove the principle that if they're able to hack you once and get money out of you, are they going to view it easier to come back and get it out of you again, or going after somebody they don't know what, you know, their system is?
So let's, as we have a few more minutes here, so let's just, you mentioned about the you know, the incident report, the response plan, about having that, but just give us a little more of a thumbnail of, okay, so assume that the people listening in have done very little toward any of this. So, you know, you talked about some of the elements of that response plan, but so Rick, give us that kind of bullet point this thing. So right now, if somebody's like coming away from this just scared to death that they are vulnerable, what are the steps that they need to be taking today, tomorrow, and these next few days?
Yeah, they need, I would suggest stepping back and looking at the big picture of the cyber world and saying, here are some fundamentals you need to do. One, you want to have good cyber practices and policies. So those policies I talked about, they're worth making sure all the IT people and critical people get them. That's the awareness training, because most issues are with humans. So do awareness training on things like passwords, multi-factor authentication, those basics. Also do phishing exercises on yourself, or have someone do them for you, where they're testing your folks on those kind of questions. Make sure that you're doing patches and updates on a rational basis, on a regular basis, and going through all those kind of things. So there's a whole series of those kind of things that are sort of protecting you, making you safer. Then you also want to do this incident response plan, which is to say, if we have a problem, here's a plan to get us back on our feet faster. And then beyond that, the question is insurance is worth looking at. The market is sort of crazy for cyber insurance right now because of huge, big losses taken by the insurers, but it's important. And then do you have someone looking at these cyber issues all the time? So one thing that we try to do is we do alerts and briefs. So I mentioned how these patches come out. We let our clients know that they've come out. And then we do an overall assessment. So this is back to where we give people that score to sort of say, what's your cyber profile look like? Because one problem is there are good consultants out there that can help people do this, but quite often they'll show up and they're not inexpensive. They'll give you a list of 15 things to do. That's overwhelming. So do you have a trusted guy that can sort of say, of those 15 things, here, what's your budget, what's your time frame, but here are the 2 or 3 things to improve your security and health profile the fastest and best way to get your score up?
So, and again, great questions that just came in too. So do you also suggest designating a leader on your team who takes this on as sort of the champion,
Sure.
if you will?
And it should be a high enough level person that can make things happen. I mean, again, this is the old thing. Don't give it to someone that if they bring something up, they've got to be able to get, the senior attention, the people running this place's attention, to have ownership. So when I was at the state of Michigan, I took ownership of it as governor. We're the best state in the nation for cyber practices by a reasonable margin because to me, I cared. So I did the awareness trainings. We did them at the state. And the classic is I'd come have our cyber people come report to say, we had a whole bunch of people not do the lesson. And it's like, well, I did the lesson. So they go back and say, well, the governor had time to do the lesson. What's your excuse?
I love it. And one final thing real quick, I want to just mention when you talked about, and it's my terminology here, it sounds to me like you just really need to suggest to every business owner to do a cyber inventory. I mean, to really sit and look and think, okay, what are the systems we have? Where are the vulnerabilities? How is this connected to the work at home? All these things we've talked about. It almost seems like an inventory would make sense.
Absolutely. So you want to do that cyber profile. Again, I'm not trying to push anything here, but we actually do an overall cyber score, like a FICO score. Other people do this too, because once you get a number, it becomes tangible. Because when you talk cybersecurity, you think I'm from Mars if I just used a bunch of cyber terms. But once you get a reference point to know how you rank with your inventory, then you have something actionable.
Gotcha. Well, I want to, by the way, I want to thank our good friends at Synchrony, who are our thought leaders when it comes to education here at HFA. And that is, of course, a big part of what these webinars are all about. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Reminder that you can find this webinar and others at myhfa.org/webinar. That's always a tremendous resource. But I want to thank Rick Snyder for joining us, co-founder of Senscy, which is a cybersecurity firm that is, specializes in helping small, medium-sized, large businesses, which is everything in our sector. Rick, I think this has been helpful, tons of takeaways. I thank you for working through this with me today and giving some really great examples, but appreciate it. And of course, as I always like to say before I let you go, I want to, of course, hope everybody has good health, good sales, and we look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Mark Schumacher. Thanks.